your future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I am Dankert Lexicon, back from a short hiatus when I visit Anatopia and a Once Upon a Time festival in Germany. As for this video, again, we're on a tight schedule, so I have to apologize for a lack of visuals in advance. Also, it was International Steampunk Day this Friday, but I totally forgot about that, so I'll try to do something on that topic next year. Anyway, let's start off with a question. What are steampunk's priorities? I'm asking because today's topic is on the definition of steampunk, or rather, should it have one? For those new to the community, or the term steampunk itself, there's an almost pathological reluctance to have an in-depth discussion on the topic on what the definition of steampunk is, or should be. It's not an easy topic for sure. It however leads to comments such as these, which are left under the first episode of the Steampunk Beginner's Guide. What is a steampunk? From what I gather, steampunk is not completely definable in one way. The definition changes from person to person. Does it have to be so tightly defined? I choose not to define it. Now, I don't know if this is a response to the content of the video. Anyway, the steampunk is personal comment is a very common argument, if you can call it that. To me, however, it feels like a kind of get out of discussion free card. Now, to be fair, I can't be bothered to type the exact same response to the question for the bajillionth time either. Those 10 hours spent on each of my videos is probably a way more productive use of my time. So, is the reluctance to answer this simple question laziness? Well, it's probably one reason, but it's also because steampunk is, or at least is part of somebody's identity. That's why people in the past have been complete cockholes regarding this question and proclaimed themselves judge and juror on who is a proper steampunk and who isn't. This fact has led to the thought-terminating cliche that steampunk is personal. It is the go-to non-offensive answer that stifles all meaningful conversation that could be had on the topic. Now, before anyone starts, this is not an attempt at gatekeeping, nor is this just a discussion on definitions. It's how we treat and use the term in any practical sense. Because if you choose not to define something, how do you know what that one thing is? But before we get into that, what is a definition anyway? According to the sources I could find, there are two ways to go about defining things. The first way is formulating a intentional definition, where we try to describe a thing by separating the various things that make the thing we attempt to describe. For example, a cogwheel is a rotating machine part with teeth, or in the case of a cogwheel, inserted teeth called cogs, which mesh with another tooth part to transmit torque. And if we have an intentional definition, then we can make a list of examples of gears. This is called a extensional definition. A extensional definition is a list of things that the term describes. So for the definition of gear, we could name screw gears, bevel gears, mitter gears, and so on. But in the case of steampunk, we run into a problem, don't we? Because we don't have an intentional definition yet. I mean, where do we start? I could list fashion designers, or writers, individual books, movies, conventions, steam makers, YouTube channels. What should I prioritize? And that is the main problem here. What is steampunk's priority? When someone newly acquainted with the topic asks, what is steampunk? The answer will certainly contain the priorities of the interviewed. Not only that, we have this urge to incorporate every priority that could be found within the retro-punk sphere into a single description. So, let me ask you, what are your priorities when it comes to your hobby, and does this priority manifest in your default answer to the question, what is steampunk? And that brings me to my main point. I think we should step away from the notion the term has to be defined in a single phrase. Like all social constructs, definitions are negotiated, sometimes over the course of millennia. And definitions are fluid. For example, humans once believed that the sun was a gaseous orb stuck to the firmament. In the face of scientific knowledge, this has been changed to a star in the Milky Way galaxy, and some other qualities that makes it our sun, and not some sun somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant. One word, one definition sounds logical, but there are plenty of words with the same pronunciation and spelling, yet have different meanings. For example, a crane is a bird, but it's also a machine that lifts things. And have you ever looked up the possible uses for the word run? Oh no! When a word has multiple meanings, you Anglo-speaking inbreds call this a homonym. Therefore, I suggest to you a solution. What if we treat the word steampunk as a homonym instead? A word that means multiple things, and not just one. So, what homonyms could steampunk refer to? Well, here are 3 examples I thought up. The genre, aka a collection of stories fans of steampunk enjoy that often combine tropes of pop culture and science fiction in a alternate, quote-unquote, historical or fantastical setting. 2. A visual style, a style that combines historical, mostly Victorian aesthetics with pop culture tropes and recycled parts. And 3. A subculture, aka the worldwide community of people who identify or are fans of the genre. I have made this argument repeatedly in the Steampunk Beginner's Guide. Unfortunately, I have not seen this argument repeated anywhere else. And I also have yet to meet the people who disagree with these definitions. So please let me know your thoughts on this. Now, all of that is fine and dandy, but why are definitions so important in the first place? As I've already stated, we need definitions to have any meaningful conversations on a topic, but there is another, more useful aspect about it that is often overlooked. In most public conversations, genres are treated as something descriptive, but for writers, genres are a tool. Each genre has a manual and a set of instruments, like fantasy has a toolkit that includes a hammer, and science fiction writers have a kit with a drill. Now you could say, that sounds rather restrictive. It really isn't. It just means you are building different things and using different techniques. And that is the point. Not everybody enjoys Harry Potter. That's the reason people prefer something like the hero's journey's approach of Star Wars over the science fiction of Star Trek. These franchises use different tropes and techniques to convey their stories and therefore appeal to different audiences. This doesn't mean writers don't mix up their tools or try different techniques, but you need a proper understanding of what you're doing, otherwise you just shoot yourself in the foot. And that is my argument why I have a definition of steampunk for myself, because I like to know what sets of tools I'm using before starting a construction project. I mean writing stuff. Oh, you know what I mean! As for the steampunk is personal, I don't really believe that. My costumes are not typical steampunks, yet people recognize us as such, so my designs must have something steampunkish that people recognize despite the personal definitions. That is what we are trying to explore here on Radio Retro Future after all. Why do steampunk like things? That is why the Steampunk Beginner's Guide is written as something descriptive. You could say the Steampunk Beginner's Guide is a extensional definition into itself without formulating a intentional definition. This was done intentionally because we were afraid that newbies would think steampunk could only be done one way, and nobody would agree with it anyway. To come back to steampunk as a genre, genres are not restrictive. Genres are frameworks. You simply work with a set of rules, and before you say, well, that's restrictive, no, it isn't. We know what works in writing and what doesn't, and there are always rules we follow, be it rules of thumb, unspoken rules, or rules passed down by experienced craftsmen to another. a matter of fact, I can tell you people become more productive because they know what rules to follow and don't have to reinvent the proverbial wheel. Communication here is what this is all about, and quite frankly, I think we could do a far better job at that. But we're going to leave it at that for today. So how do you describe steampunk to newbies? Be it personal or not. Help us to improve our content by supporting us on Subscribestar like these wonderful people do. And as always, make things your way.